Welcome to The Gut Show. I'm your host, Erin Judge, registered dietitian and founder of Gutivate. I'm also your fellow IBS warrior. Our goal on this side of the internet is to empower those with IBS and digestive disorders to understand their gut better, to have a healthier relationship with their bodies, and to make confident choices to improve their digestive health. During this season, you can expect a conversation around a hot topic related to gut health, digestion, and IBS. As a disclaimer, I am a dietitian, but I am not your dietitian. So everything covered in this episode is meant to be educational and is purely information that you can take back to your healthcare team in order to make the best decisions for you. If you're new here and something just doesn't feel right in your gut, if your symptoms have led you to this podcast, I invite you to start by taking the quiz, What's Your Poop Personality? Your personality type will unveil what your symptoms may mean, what may be causing them, and what you can do about them. This is a free quiz and you can take it today at gutivate.com or find the direct link below in the show notes. While you're going to take the quiz, let's jump into today's episode. Now for a quick word from our sponsors with resources that might support you. Is a gluten-free diet just not cutting it, or maybe not even necessary when it comes to chronic symptoms like bloating, gas, and pain? Research actually shows that in those without celiac disease, it's actually the FODMAP, the carbohydrate fructan in wheat, not gluten, that causes symptoms most often. This means that you may not need a strict gluten-free diet to see symptom relief. And it means that if you are reacting to fructans, there may be more foods in your diet beyond wheat that are causing you symptoms. This includes foods like garlic and onion, and even some fruits and vegetables that can sneak their way into your diet and contribute to those chronic symptoms. You can choose to limit these foods and reduce your overall fructan intake in order to avoid symptoms. You also have the option to break the fructan down using FODZYME, an enzyme blend that targets fructan, lactose, and GOS FODMAPs, and that will help you break these FODMAPs down to then prevent the symptoms. Learn more about FODZYME in the show notes, and you can use the code THEGUTSHOW for 20% off your first order. Did you know that you can now order your own gut health tests without waiting months for a doctor's appointment? Gemelli Biotech offers trusted, science-backed, at-home tests for conditions like SIBO, EMO, ISO, and post-infectious IBS. Their Trio-Smart breath test measures the three key gases, hydrogen, methane, and hydrogen sulfide, to detect different forms of microbial overgrowth. As for those with IBS symptoms, IBS-Smart is a simple blood test that can confirm post-infectious IBS with clinical accuracy. Validated by the leaders in gut health, these are tests that you can trust and tests that you can take comfortably from your home. So go to getgutanswers.com to find out which tests are right for you and use the code ErinJudge25, all one word, ErinJudge25, to save $25 on your order. And now let's get back to the show. Welcome back to The Gut Show. Today we're kind of following up on an episode we did a couple of weeks ago on gut health supplements, but we're going to talk a little bit more specifically around fermented foods, probiotics, and prebiotics. So outside of supplements only, what's going on? How do these work for gut health? And specifically for those with chronic gut symptoms, like those with IBS, what do we need to consider? Are these worth spending your money and time on? Should you be approaching them a different way than what might be recommended on the internet? What do you need to know in order to get the most out of these specific foods, characteristics of foods, nutrients, whatever we want to label them as? So there's going to be a little bit of a repeat when it comes to specific supplements from that other episode, but hopefully this will help spark a conversation around these specifically to then be able to set us up for evaluating emerging research in this area, because this is a huge topic and has been a huge topic for many years, and I believe will continue to be a big topic in this space for the next 5 to 10 years to come in the industry as well as in actual research. So we're going to start off by talking about probiotics. Probiotics are live microbes. Typically, these are consumed in supplemental form and encapsulated. We're going to get to fermented foods because that's going to be a bit different. Sometimes these get lumped together, but for the basis of this episode, we'll talk about probiotics specifically, and these have to be live upon consumption and ideally in delivery in the gut, which you're typically going to get only through an encapsulated form. There are some that are powdered forms and they're kind of dormant until They then are exposed to the gut, but encapsulated forms tend to be some of the best because they can release these live microbes at the right time and avoid the killing off of the microbes with stomach acid, like what we may see with fermented foods and live microbes that are consumed kind of naturally or through food, if you will. When it comes to the research around probiotics for health in general, but specifically IBS, it's mixed. There are a decent number of studies. There are some like poor studies that are more animal studies. There are some well-designed, robust studies like a double placebo randomized control trials. There are systematic reviews out there. There is a lot of research to choose from. However, the data itself is considered limited because there's not a lot of replicated, repeated data. And the problem is that a lot of times, and when we look at the research, we're trying to do a study on probiotics, the exact strain of probiotic used may change. The dosing of that strain may change. How long it's used, it may change. The combination of strains, if there's multiple use, that might change. The specific population it's used in, or like the specific outcomes it's looking for, that may be changed. And so we don't consider it to be robust like we would prefer with research and data. We consider it limited for that reason. However, there are some studies that are out there, and specifically looking at IBS, we have some studies. There are also some studies that have been done in specific symptoms like bloating or constipation or diarrhea. And there have been some decent outcomes through some of those specific studies. So if you're considering utilizing a probiotic, you can look at the studies that are available and like glean some information from that and find a best approach to take. However, when we look at those results, it is also mixed. Most often we see either maybe a small amount of benefit, whether it's considered significant or not, or just no real change or difference compared to like a placebo or other trial, other intervention. We don't often see negatives or adverse events. So these do tend to be considered safe. They're just not considered to be highly effective. So most of the regulatory bodies or the like American College of Gastroenterology or the American Gastroenterological Association, they don't recommend the use of them in the IBS population just because the results aren't the best, but they tend to be pretty safe. So they're typically not going to be harmful. Now, they can be harmful in the case where the gut is very compromised. So untreated celiac disease, cases of active inflammation with IBD, recent gut infection where there's active inflammation, there might be some harm there, as well as a recent bowel surgery. We definitely do not utilize probiotics in those cases. There might be more risk involved. However, in practice, outside of those cases, we do often see symptoms related to probiotics, especially bloating. So if you are experiencing a lot of symptoms and you don't know if the probiotic you used was effective, there's really limited research backing it up to begin with. You remove the probiotic and some symptoms improve, your body likely just wasn't tolerating that well, and that's okay. There likely wasn't enough of a benefit for that to make a huge difference. Now, will we see these used and see these a little bit more targeted or part of what we call precision medicine in the future? Probably. So the next level when it comes to probiotics is one, replicated research. We know it's needed. And so the companies that are selling them, they don't have to do the research. The FDA isn't really even regulating a lot of these. And so you see a ton of companies making them and selling them and making a ton of money on them, which is its own conversation. Hopefully, some of these companies will put their money to better use and make consistent replicated studies in certain populations, or at least with certain specific symptoms, so that we can have better quality data to be able to understand which ones are most likely going to be effective for the outcomes we're looking for. But what we really may see, and what I hope happens in the future, is that we can personalize probiotic recommendations based on your specific microbial profile, or even your short-chain fatty acid profile, some sort of marker we can look at to personalize. As of today, a lot of the gut microbiome tests, the mapping microbiome tests that are out there, are not validated, and they're not considered to be trusted sources of this information. They're not that useful yet.
In the research world, there are ways of mapping the microbiome that has been more validated, that is trusted, again, used in research settings. It's very expensive, but what we should see are available tests that are validated and trusted, hopefully direct to consumer, to then be able to make more personalized diet recommendations, but also looking at the probiotic, the prebiotic, fermented food, all of this world to see what's going to be the most effective, because that's likely why results are mixed. That's the belief, is that human microbiome makeups, it varies from person to person. And even within disease states, especially those that affect the gut, like IBS, there's some consistency, there's some, commonalities, usually on like a more general level, but some of those specifics are unique to each person. And so there might be value in precision recommendations with probiotics based on where you start. And then we can also ideally monitor results on that level versus relying on symptoms alone, which can be tricky because a placebo effect is very strong in this population. Meaning, if you think that there's an intervention that's working, sometimes that works for your symptoms, which is a wild phenomenon that happens, but it is very real. And so that could be happening with some of this probiotic research. So that's one thing that definitely needs to be nailed down. Do I use probiotics in my practice? Do I recommend them? Very few. I'm not very quick to recommend probiotics. I do use some, but it's based on the limited data we have. And more often than not, patients will find probiotics on their own. They have some that they want to try. They're already on them. They believe that there might be some benefit, or they want to give it a shot, and I will back that up. Or I may use them if we've just really exhausted all options and we've kind of hit the end of the road and we have a little bit of an improvement that we're looking for. Maybe we'll try a probiotic in that case, but I don't use them very quickly. I'm not one to typically jump on them. Now, something I do use most often in practice and focus on, especially when it comes to diet, are prebiotics. So prebiotics are the non-digestible dietary fibers, so parts of plants that promote the growth of beneficial gut microorganisms. So when we're thinking about prebiotics, aside from fiber, these are always fibers. Not all fibers are prebiotics. So prebiotics are the ones that have the benefit on the host, the person consuming them, right? So it's like kind of the superfood of the fibers that are out there. When we look at IBS specifically, the goal is that adding in prebiotics may help promote more beneficial microbes that have been shown to be lower in those with IBS, because we do tend to see a sort of a dysbiotic profile in a lot of IBS patients with some of the data we have, and especially looking at bifidobacteria, which are a group that has been shown to be lower in those with IBS, but associated with healthy gut outcomes, healthy health outcomes overall. Prebiotics have been shown to increase these groups, so adding them in may help improve the health of the gut and kind of address IBS on a more kind of foundational level versus symptoms alone. So that's why that might be helpful. So the goal would be encouraging good bacteria, which prebiotics can do. They feed healthy gut microbes and again, lead to a benefit, but also maybe producing anti-inflammatory compounds, which are the byproducts of prebiotic fermentation. So when gut microbes eat the prebiotics, they produce byproducts, one of them being short-chain fatty acids. These are shown to have an anti-inflammatory effect in the body and in the gut. They also provide energy for the cells that are lining the gut and may help protect the permeability of the gut, all things that could be at play in those with IBS. So they don't necessarily attack symptoms specifically, but they may help improve symptoms by addressing some of the causes of IBS, the drivers of IBS. Now, when we look at actual research around this, there are very few studies that have been done in IBS so far. There are some studies that look at constipation more so as fiber supplements, but utilizing these prebiotic fibers versus just the prebiotic effect. But we really do need more research on this theory of what if we improve these microbial profiles? What if can we specifically target inflammation with the use of prebiotics? Can we specifically improve intestinal permeability with the use? We already know that improving beneficial microbes, decreasing permeability, and decreasing low-grade inflammation will help with IBS, but do prebiotics have that effect enough to say that they are a trusted, direct intervention to then have these outcomes. We need research to prove that. Now, are they harmful? No. So there's only really benefit to utilizing prebiotics, except for symptoms, which we'll talk about. And so it can be a very low risk intervention to put in place, and something that I do put in place with every single client I work with in some form or fashion, usually starting at the beginning, but definitely once we get symptoms under control or stabilized in some way. This is a focus area because of the benefits of prebiotic intake on gut health, also overall health. So when we think about prebiotics and the actual intervention, these can be supplemental. They can also be found in food. So there's two approaches we could take, either adding a supplement and or increasing food intake. Food first is a great approach. That's usually an approach I like to take. However, many prebiotic rich foods also tend to be high in FODMAPs, or fermentable carbohydrates. These are more often triggers for those with IBS, and so they can cause excess gas production. That's another byproduct of prebiotic fermentation, but they can also pull water into the gut for some, lead to symptoms, and cause problems. So a food-first approach can work really well for some, but it may not work perfectly for others. And so we may have to adjust portions, choose the low FODMAP options, maybe spread them out throughout the day, go slower with our increase, and use supplemental forms of these prebiotics. So some of the common supplemental forms that might be added to foods already, especially like health foods, like processed foods that are kind of more healthy alternatives, but also can be isolated, are inulin, chicory root, pectin. Those are common. FOS, fructooligosaccharides, that one's common. Psyllium and partially hydrolyzed guar gum are also common. Some of these are high FODMAP, some of them are low. So not all supplements are created equal. There's also some emerging research that suggests that supplements alone may not be the answer, and the context of prebiotics and fibers within food may be more beneficial. So likely that we need both, right? So if you're trying to get a supplemental form, psyllium and partially hydrolyzed guar gum are typically going to be more well tolerated. They're lower FODMAP, they're less fermentable, they tend to be very well tolerated. There is a decent amount of research for them, especially related to constipation and diarrhea, and then even looking at IBS. And so they are a lot better tolerated and tend to be a good approach, especially if we're starting to implement more intake and we want the body to adjust to that, to then be able to tolerate it in foods. So that is an approach I take. And then I usually add in low FODMAP prebiotic options. So looking at canned lentils and canned chickpeas, or lower portions of beans versus a large portion of beans. Like that's one example of a food approach that can kind of balance these two pieces to then still get the benefit. Now, there's also prebiotics mixed with probiotics, which are called symbiotics. And I get asked about these. I feel like maybe the last 3 years, this has become less sexy or less talked about in the more monetary product industry. But for a while, this was the big focus point of probiotics are out, symbiotics are in. This is simply probiotics, these live microbes mixed with the prebiotic food source to then give you the benefit. The theory makes sense. The research, there's just not that much of it. So if you are taking a probiotic, you want to be eating fiber and prebiotics or utilizing a symbiotic to add them together. This brings more complexity to the research I mentioned before with probiotics, where we don't have a lot of replicated research. Does a strain differ in its effect if we add a prebiotic to it? Probably, right? And so I think in theory, this does make a lot of sense. In practice, this makes a lot of sense, but it might be changing or altering what we know in the research, which then requires a lot more monitoring to make sure that things are actually working for you. So I truly believe that symbiotics are going to be the future of precision medicine after other pieces are put into place. But you do see those often, and you can still get a symbiotic effect by eating prebiotic-rich foods in addition to taking the probiotic or adding the microbes through fermented foods. Maybe you see a benefit. And that leads us to the next big piece of this, which are fermented foods. So fermented foods are produced, they become fermented through the controlled growth of beneficial microorganisms, typically bacteria or yeast, which convert carbohydrates, like the sugars, the carbohydrates, into other substances. So they are live microbes in a food. they feed on the carbohydrate source, that's fermentation, and then they produce other substances or kind of byproducts. So this is used to preserve food. That's one way that this is used. That's why it was used more in ancient cultures. Great form of preservation, but also can produce enzymes, organic acids, vitamins, and a variety of bioactive compounds, which are known to then improve gut health. Typically, the research around that is done in the body. So the feeding of your beneficial microbes with prebiotics or food, and then those compounds are produced, like we mentioned with short chain fatty acids, they have a health benefit. With fermented foods, this is kind of done in the food. So you're eating the byproducts in a way. Some examples of fermented foods include yogurt, kefir, kombucha, sauerkraut, kimchi, miso, and even sourdough bread. Sourdough bread is a bit unique when we look at fermented food as a whole because the other forms have live microbes present. That's likely where the benefit happens. With sourdough bread or sourdough products, the fermentation happens and then you bake it, so you kill off the microbes, but you still have some benefit, primarily in how digestion friendly or easy to digest the product and the bread will be, but you may not have quite as many like short chain fatty acids, organic compounds, like other benefits in the food because those live microbes have been killed off through the cooking process. When they're kept cold or kind of preserved in a way, that helps keep those microbes alive versus them dying, which changes what's actually happening in the food or what you're getting from the food, which can be kind of complicated when it comes to what foods you're choosing or information that exists. Now for a quick word from our sponsors with resources that might support you.
When it comes to irritable bowel syndrome with constipation, or IBS-C, there's no one-size-fits-all treatment. If you're not satisfied with your current IBS-C medication, it may be time to try something different. Ibsrela, tenapanor, is a prescription medicine used to treat adults with IBS-C. Ibsrela works differently to help relieve the constipation and abdominal symptoms of IBS-C and could be the right option for you. Ready to try something different for your IBS-C symptoms? Ask your doctor about Ibsrela. Do not give Ibsrela to children less than 6 years of age. You should not give Ibsrela to children 6 to less than 18 years. It may harm them. The most common side effect is diarrhea, sometimes severe, and your child could get severe dehydration. Stop taking Ibsrela and call your doctor if you develop severe diarrhea. Do not take Ibsrela if you have a bowel blockage. Tell your doctor if you are pregnant or breastfeeding and about the medicines you take. Other common side effects include swelling or a feeling of fullness or pressure in your abdomen, gas, or dizziness. Learn more at ibsrela.com/PI or call 1-844-IBSRELA and press option 4.
Are you struggling with bloating, constipation, or diarrhea, and you're still waiting to see your doctor?
Take control and get answers with Gemelli Biotech's at-home gut health tests.
The Trio Smart Breath Test is the only at-home test that is validated to look for all 3 gases that are associated with microbial overgrowth: hydrogen, methane, and hydrogen sulfide. That means it can detect SIBO, EMO, and ISO in one simple test. It ships right to your door, no appointment needed. You take it and you send it back, then you get answers. If your IBS symptoms started after a stomach bug or food poisoning, it could be post-infectious IBS. The IBS-Smart blood test is a quick at-home test to help identify it. Fun fact, 1 in 9 people who get food poisoning will end up with post-infectious IBS, and most don't even know they have it.
With both of Gemelli Biotech's tests,
You'll get clinically backed results in about a week, and you can take them straight to your provider. No waiting, no referrals, just answers. Find out which tests are right for you at getgutanswers.com and use the code AaronJudge25, all one word, AaronJudge25, to save $25 on your order. You can also find all these details in your show notes.
as someone with IBS-C, I've struggled with symptoms related to food for the majority of my life, specifically FODMAPs. My personal triggers, beans, dairy products, garlic, and onion, would leave me feeling bloated and uncomfortable after meals, especially whenever I was eating out or traveling or living my life outside of my home, which meant I either had to just deal with the symptoms or eat bland, awful food and miss out on experiencing the social interactions and the joy of food. Finding FODZYME was a game changer for me. This is an enzyme blend that targets FODMAPs, specifically the GOS that's found in beans, fructan in the garlic, onion, wheat, and even different fruits and vegetables, as well as lactose in dairy products. I stash this in my wallet, my husband's wallet, every bag I own. I take it with me everywhere I go so that I can simply sprinkle it on my meals, eat with confidence, and feel my best after. If you want to try FODZYME for yourself, go to FODZYME.com and don't forget to use the code THEGUTSHOW, all one word, THEGUTSHOW, for 20% off your first order.
And now let's get back to the show.
So when we look at fermented foods and their health benefits, this is typically going to be due to the live microbes and their metabolites then influencing our gut. You're not typically going to just get these live microbes, and they may not be producing an effect very long through digestion because, again, they're going to die within your stomach acid. But their compounds might be why, the consumption of them can have some better outcomes. There's really no one-size-fits-all effect, though, and outcomes can vary. And so there is still a lot we don't fully know, and there's still a lot we need to fully understand and research. But what does the research currently say? So a 2021 Stanford study looked at 10 weeks of a diet that's high in fermented foods. I believe that it was like 5 servings a day. So a lot of fermented food, and that included yogurt, kefir, and kimchi, which significantly then increased overall gut microbial diversity in healthy adults. We know that better diversity leads to better health outcomes and better gut health, and so that was shown to be effective. The same Stanford study also saw a decrease in levels of 19 different inflammatory proteins, including interleukin-6, in those who ate the fermented foods, suggesting that fermented foods may help reduce chronic inflammation throughout the body. It's not perfectly designed, right? We're just looking at markers, and we're looking at other parts of food, right? Not just the fermented part of it, but that intervention did lead to those results, which means maybe there is a benefit. There are all other studies that also have looked at regular consumption of fermented foods and increased abundance of beneficial bacteria in groups like the lactobacillus and bifidobacterium groups, which then may improve digestive and immune functions and have been shown to be low in people with certain conditions like IBS. So that might be beneficial. And there's some evidence that the fermentation process will help break down or remove what we call anti-nutrients like phytic acid, which may interfere with the absorption of certain minerals, especially like iron and zinc. And so we may have increased nutrient absorption with the process of fermentation, increasing the bioavailability of certain nutrients in foods. Not perfectly proven. There's not a lot of great data on this. Definitely more of like putting strings together, but maybe there's some benefit in that as well. So there could be some strong evidence to suggest that fermented foods are worth adding to your diet. Fermented foods have also been utilized for centuries, and in some cultures are utilized even more and thought to have these health benefits. Ayurvedic medicine utilizes fermented foods. And so we can kind of pull from that and say, okay, this might be one reason to explain this, but we really do need more research to fully nail down like what is actually happening to make these sweeping claims. But is it harmful to add these foods in? No, these foods tend to be very safe to add, depending on some of like how they're stored, just food in general, but they are very safe. They're not supplements, right? There's no strong regulation, but a little bit more since they are food products. You can also make these yourself. Again, these have been used for a long time. There is very little harm. However, there could be some increase in symptoms because some fermented food products are high FODMAP. A lot of dairy products are fermented. Sometimes lactose, which is the sugar in dairy, gets fermented. And so it may decrease in some fermented foods, but it may not be decreased in all. There are typically lactose-free alternatives out there. There are also some dairy-free alternatives that still go through fermentation that may have a benefit. So there's a way around that. When we look at kimchi, there may be added onion or garlic. And again, they might be slightly easier to digest than onion and garlic plain, but they still could be high FODMAP. And so that may be something that causes more symptoms. And like we see sometimes in probiotics, without a clear reason why, some people just may not tolerate large portions of these foods and may have more symptoms like bloating and pain and gassiness, things like that. And so it does require a little bit of personalization. When we look at IBS specifically, is there research on this? A little bit, not too much, but some. So when we look at fermented milk products first, so like yogurt and kefir, there was a 2025 systematic review meta-analysis that looked at different randomized controlled trials that exist, specifically in IBS and these products like kefir. They showed a beneficial effect on overall symptom relief. There was another study outside of these that looked at fermented milk consumption and how it increased butyrate, increasing bacteria. Butyrate is a short-chain fatty acid that's been most studied in association with gut health. They also showed a decrease in a specific pathogen in women with IBS, but they didn't really look at other health outcomes or like what this meant, just differences from start to finish. Maybe there's a benefit that can be seen there over time. Looking at kimchi specifically, a 2022 randomized double-blind placebo-controlled study looked at kimchi in 87 IBS patients over 12 weeks. They did find that those who ate kimchi saw significant improvements in typical symptoms like pain, incomplete evacuation, and bloating. They also did look at inflammatory markers, and they saw a decreased level of some of them, especially TNF alpha in the blood. And then they did see a shift in microbiome composition, increasing Firmicutes bacteria while decreasing Bacteroidetes and Tenoricutes population. So possibly leading to a more kind of healthy, balanced microbiome, but no strong outcomes in terms of what that meant for treatment. Looking at sauerkraut, there was a 2018 randomized controlled trial in only 34 IBS patients that found that consuming both pasteurized and unpasteurized sauerkraut for 6 weeks significantly reduced IBS severity scores. They found no difference in symptom improvement between the unpasteurized or the pasteurized versions. And so that might be due to more of the prebiotic effect of the cabbage, not just the live microbes. Maybe the fermentation process did enough. Like there's a lot of questions around that. So there is a little bit of research available, but that doesn't mean that this is going to work for every person. We do need more robust studies. We need more replicated studies, and we really do need to understand what exactly is happening. Again, to make these broad claims, to just add the foods, maybe not. If you are thinking about adding fermented foods, what do you want to consider? First, FODMAPs. If you're new to adding fermented foods, choosing lower FODMAP options may be beneficial. So some sauerkraut might be beneficial over kimchi. Making your own versions of these products may be beneficial. Pickles can be with less garlic. So again, that may be one that you use because cucumber tend to be well tolerated. Choosing lactose-free products, dairy-free products for like kefir and yogurt, adding in miso, all of those options may be a place to start. Histamine also needs to be considered. If you know that you struggle with histamines, fermented foods are going to contain biogenic amines like histamines, and so they may increase those symptoms. And so you may need to utilize antihistamines or kind of adjust your treatment plan for your histamine intolerance, MCAS, whatever may be going on there. Or you may have to wait until other things are controlled to add prebiotics, or you may have to wait until other things are controlled to then add the fermented foods, or honestly, they just may not fit into the picture for you, depending on the full picture of what's going on there. And just like with fiber intake, when you are adding in fermented foods, add a little bit at a time and go slow as you continue to increase your intake, because it may take some time for your gut to adjust to eating them in order to tolerate them well. If you go straight to that 5 servings of fermented foods a day, you're likely not going to feel great and you may not adjust very quickly. It may take some time, and that is okay. The goal is to find a place that's sustainable and see results that work for you on that foundational level of like what's happening beneath the surface, but also what's happening at the surface and what's happening with your symptoms. Because if you have more symptoms as you add the foods in, you're not very likely to continue eating these foods long term. And our goal is to make sure that your diet works for you long term, not just in the short term. So that wraps up our conversation on probiotics, prebiotics, symbiotics, fermented foods. I hope that was informative. I wanted to keep it fairly straightforward and simple because there is a lot of information out there. And when it comes down to all of these things, it depends. And the research is conflicting. Actual practical anecdotal results are conflicting. As someone who's worked in this space for almost a decade now and is also trained by dietitians and providers who've worked in this space for many, many decades, every person is unique, and every person's plan when it comes to their diet, their supplement use, their gut health plan, the strategies that work, it will be individualized. And with some of these interventions, we are doing some trial and error just because we just don't have a lot of solid data. We don't have the level of precision medicine that we truly need. But with some trial and error, listening to your body, looking at how things improve or they don't, we can personalize your plan. And it is totally okay for your personalized plan to look different than maybe what you're seeing online marketed to you. It's easy to say, take this probiotic, buy this and you'll feel better. Everyone should be eating this, or whatever, messages that exist. It's easy to say that. And if you see results from an intervention, it's easy for you to say that. But that may not be the case for every person. And it's also okay for your plan to look a bit different and for what your body needs to be different than what is needed for other people. And that will segue us perfectly into next week's episode as we talk about what diet is actually best for IBS. Spoiler, it may not just be one, but we'll talk about some of the practical pieces of diet and how to put that together and continue personalizing for you if this is something that resonates.
Are you listening to today's episode with the main thought being, what are the steps that I can take to get rid of my symptoms right now? While I hope that the information that we share in every episode of The Gut Show leaves you feeling more empowered and more confident in your body, it's not always going to solve your problem or give you a clear direction for your specific symptoms and your needs. The Master Method membership is an online program for the person with chronic digestive symptoms and IBS who wants step-by-step guidance to understand their body, address the drivers of IBS, reduce symptoms, and build resilience in your gut long-term. This membership includes a step-by-step course and a dietitian-led community that teaches you how to holistically address each symptom and the IBS drivers, how to reduce symptoms more strategically and with confidence, and guidelines for better gut health long-term so that you're not only thinking about today, but you're also improving your outcomes in the future. It is time to ditch the symptoms and get your life back. The membership is your first step. You can learn more and enroll at IBSmastermethod.com and use the code GUTSHOW, GUTSHOW, GUTSHOW for $25 off your enrollment fee.